I'm Carolyn Hannah Anderson. I'm Russell's grandmother, and we are here in the assisted living at Richland Place, and he is wanting to hear a little bit about my background and family and growing up years, which I think is so sweet of him. So I was born in Florence, Alabama, moved to Huntsville, Alabama, when I was 18 months old, and because my father was transferred with a furniture company, Sororities, and he was made the new manager of the Huntsville store. And we lived there. I can't remember my really young years. I have a brother who's 4.5 years younger than I am. His name is Bill Hunter, and he lives in Murfreesboro, and he comes to visit me from time to time, and we've always been very close, and I probably attribute that to my parents. We were a close family, and I can remember going to a church with my mother when I was very young, and there weren't many people at that church, but she kind of got me started reaching out, learning about Jesus, God, and those things. And we called her Mimi. And my daddy's mother was also, she lived in Franklin, Tennessee. And her name was Willie Bailey Hunter. And my middle name is Bailey, which comes from her. And that was her name when she was Willie Bailey. Willie for a girl sounds horrible. But we kind of stuck in our family. So, anyway, I'm trying to think how I went to...
So what was it like growing up in Huntsville? What do you remember from it?
I can tell you some interesting things in Huntsville. When I went to Huntsville, the arsenal was being built. And my daddy was president of the Chamber of Commerce. And we did not have houses for all the people and scientists and people that were coming to build us out of bomb. And so Daddy made an appeal to the people of Huntsville to take in boarders, roomers, until we could get housing for these people. And we did that. Huntsville was a very patriotic town. This was during World War II. And we all saved tin cans and smashed them and put them in a container. And newspapers we collected from house to house. And then they'd turn them over. People knitted things for the soldiers. And and we sang patriotic songs all the time. God bless America. Well, I can't begin to tell you all of them, but we sang a lot of patriotic songs at school. And then we bought savings bonds. And for 25 cents, you could get a sticker in your little book, and by the time you had filled the book, you had spent $5 with the soldiers. And we thought that was wonderful.
That's awesome. So what was Huntsville, the city, like back then? And
it was very small.
Yeah.
Oh, I had a lot of antebellum homes there. It's just hard to believe that it grew like it did.
Yeah. So,
Because when I lived there, it really was a small
yeah.
town. It wasn't a city
Yeah.
by any means.
So did you feel when you were a kid like you were in a small, like, did you have the perception of that you were in a small town, or did you feel like you had everything you needed and you were?
I was just satisfied.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd walk to the movie theater because everything was closed. We had one movie theater and it cost a dime.
So what did you do the most as a kid? Were movies really popular? Like what would you do when you were out with your friends? Or
Oh, we played kick the can and
yeah.
Red Robo, and games like that. We'd usually play them late in the afternoon,
Yeah.
and we'd all get together to do
So
things.
who were your best friends while you were in Huntsville? Did you have any, like, a best friend or group of friends while you were there?
Nancy and Emily Linehorn, good friends, and Jean Luther, Guy Spencer. Guy Spencer was the son of Mother's closest friend, and I'm afraid Guy had a crush on me, but I did not have a crush on him. And because our families were close, we did things together. They only had the one son, who became mayor and the big wig in Huntsville later on in his life. But he would come up here to Nashville. He took me to the Swanee dances up at Swanee. But we were it was just friends.
Yeah.
And I said, I've got to tell you a funny story. Jimmy, the one person he was jealous of was the guy Spencer. He had no reason in the world to be jealous of him. And I was with my little sewing group, and I was telling them the guy was coming in town, and was taking Mother and I out for dinner. And this was much later. I mean, I was married to Jimmy. Had been married. And anyway, my sewing group got together and sent a bouquet of flowers to my house. And it said, "I'm looking forward to tonight, love, Guy." And I thought, what in the world?
That's incredible. So did Jimmy see the bouquet of flowers?
Oh, that's what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
Oh. But that was the more recent. That's probably the last 25.
That's funny. So have you kept up with any of these friends? I mean, obviously Guy, to some extent.
I came to my painting shows and bought several of my paintings.
Really? That's awesome.
Yeah. And then he died about a year after that. But he corresponded with me about the paintings, and I don't know, he never let go.
So I take it he got married, though.
Oh, he married twice.
Yeah, okay. And did he stay in Alabama for his whole life? Did he live in Huntsville?
Yeah, he stayed in Huntsville. And as I said, he was very big in politics and everything.
Yeah.
And
Cool. So then moving on from Huntsville, so then how did you find out the news that you were going to be moving to Nashville? How did you take it? Did you feel excited? Did you feel nervous?
I was kind of excited because it was a big city.
Yeah.
But I really had no idea about it. When I was in Huntsville, I was fairly athletic, I guess. My family seems to be that way. And in the 4th grade, we had a race, boys and girls, across this field. And the one that won the prize. Well, I beat all the boys.
Are you serious?
I'm serious.
Wow.
Well, they did like that at all. And that was when I first learned you don't beat boys.
Oh my goodness.
So from then on, I've tried to play the cool side.
That's hilarious. So how was it once you got to Nashville? Was it what you expected it would be? Was it different?
I was very disappointed.
Really?
First of all, we came to Nashville and we were only here about a year and a half, not 2 full years. And we rented a house, and I went to Woodmont School for 1 month, and I had no idea what they were talking about. I was from Alabama. And so then Daddy found another little house to rent, and we rented that on Battery Lane. I went to Burton School, and one of my classmates was Pat Boone, the movie star and singer. And Pat and I could play the piano then, and I would play some boogie woogie. And he just loved that. Of course, he was a singer.
Yeah.
And but then then I went back to Florence, where my daddy was. He knew all along that he was not going to stay in Nashville. His plan was my grandfather in Florence was building a building that he was going to build for him, and open a furniture store in Florence, which is another little town. And Florence is Sheffield, and Tuscumbia. They're the 3 together there. And so anyway, Daddy, I can't remember, I don't think he ever opened the business. We built a beautiful home there in Florence. And my grandfather owned the building. It was 3 stories. And Daddy said, I don't have the money to put that much furniture. I can't afford that. And then my grandparents, the Stricklands, Robert Strickland, and my grandmother, they thought we moved back and that we'd just be buddies with them. And we wanted to be with the young people, and it got to be pretty sticky.
Really?
So, meanwhile, Sturkey's was trying to get Daddy back because he was a good boy. And they offered him more money, and they offered him the job of supervisor of a large number of Sturkey stores. And so he took it. And we left. We were only in Florence 2 years maybe.
So how old are you at this point?
I was in the 7th and 8th grade.
Gotcha.
No, I think that's right. So we went back came to Nashville. Well, I loved Florence. And I had a boyfriend. And I was madly in love with him. And I was going to have to leave him. And I was boo-hooing all over the place. Mother and Daddy went on to Nashville, bought a house in Belmead on Canterbury Drive. It was the only house on that street, and it's still there. And then my grandparents brought me up to Nashville. And I cried, and I cried, and I cried. But I felt sorry for my parents. I was miserable. I would come out and eat, go back to my room and cry some more.
Yeah.
I was just so miserable. And I didn't have any friends. I was just, and then when I moved there, it must have been in February, because they had a bad snowstorm. They closed all the schools. So I went to school one day, maybe 2 days, and then they closed the schools for about 2 weeks. And so I had no way of meeting anybody. And it was a really rough time. And then the other thing was that the school I attended, which was Palmer School, I had come from Alabama, and there was the biggest difference. I didn't know what they were talking about. This was a group of really smart people that went to this school. They all lived in Belmead and Green Hills. And it was such a big difference that the principal or the teacher, it was so sweet, they told me not even bother to take the exams. I hadn't had anything.
Oh
They
my
were
goodness.
having. And then the principal's name was Miss Talley. Miss Talley told Mother, she said, I really think all the girls were going to Ward-Belmont. That was the prestigious school then. And the boys were going to MBA. And so those that didn't go off of east. Anyway, she suggested that I go to Hillsboro public school, that it would be a lot easier, and that maybe I could get caught up, because I had been an honor student in Alabama. And it was a big change. They were a good full year ahead of me at the school. So I went to Hillsboro, didn't know a soul, don't know why, but for some reason they had sororities and fraternities in high school. And I didn't even know what that was. And they were having rush. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what all of this was foreign to me.
Yeah.
And well, Mother and Daddy had a friend whose daughter was a sap, which was probably the best sorority to be in. And they rushed me, and I got to meet some few people during the rush, and then a Hillsboro sorority also rushed me, and both of them gave me bids. And I was going to take the Hillsboro, and Mother said, no, you need to take the SAP one. If you're thinking about going to Ward-Belmont later, and you pledged SAP. So anyway, that's what I did, and it was good, because I met a lot of people in the sorority, and then I became friends. Some of these people are still my friends today.
That's great.
I got a couple of them that live next door.
Really? So how many sororities were there?
I think there were 5.
5.
About 5 fraternities.
Interesting. And this was 9th grade, like freshman year of high school?
Mhm.
And then, so was that your main group of friends then throughout the rest of high school? The girls
Pretty
in that
much,
sorority?
because I had gone to Hillsboro, I still it was kind of like the best of both worlds. I got to know a lot of people.
Gotcha.
High school was really fun. And, you know, when you're in high school, you have ups and downs. And you have times that you just feel like the world is coming to an end. And other times you're just on top of the world. And that's the way it was. But I never did really feel like I got caught up academically. To be honest, I was probably more interested in boys than girls. And also, I think I may have had ADD and didn't realize it. They didn't have that then. Didn't know what that was. But in looking back, I think I couldn't concentrate very well. I couldn't read. I never read books. I just read what I had to read. And then I managed, after my sophomore year, I transferred to Ward-Belmont. And Ward-Belmont has been around for years and years. And, had you heard of Ward-Belmont?
No, I'm not familiar.
See, everybody in Nashville knows Ward-Belmont. It was a college and a prep school. And all the local girls, there were boarders too, that went to Ward-Belmont. So my junior year, I transferred from Hillsboro, or the end of my sophomore year, to Ward-Belmont. And everybody was so nice, and I had a lot of friends and made lots of new friends. The schools were small, and but academically, it was still pretty tough, just like what you went through. And the churches in Florence had formal dances twice a year, one at Christmas and one in the spring. They all had offices, and the thing about those of us that really enjoy that so much, we wanted to go to all of the dances.
So all the different fraternities? Yeah.
And I managed to get invited to 4 out of 5.
That's great.
But I never did get to that 5th one but one time. And it was a Hillsboro group. And they were a little older. But anyway, they were so much fun, and we had no breaks. And I forgot to tell you how I got my name Fifi.
Yeah, I would love to hear that too.
Okay. After I came to Palmer School in the 8th grade, miserably unhappy, they had what they called the 13 Club. That means they were 13 years old. Everybody was about that age. And I was new, I didn't know the names of people or anything. And the sororities, when you invited a boy, you had to invite a boy to go to your dance, and somebody else would invite you, you hoped.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't get up the nerve to ask this boy. I didn't know him. And I kept putting it off and putting it off. He knew I was going to ask him. And he tried to make himself available, but I just couldn't get up the nerve. And finally, my friend Ree Robinson took me and shoved me into him and said, "Glenn, Fifi has something she wants to ask you. And I about died. And anyway, I said, you know, would you go to the 13th of the, and he was so nice. Well, we went to the 13th club dance, and I had been in Florence where we jitterbugged and danced. But they didn't, they just went 1-2 back, 1-2 back. They'd been fortnightly and learned the basic thing. Well, I said to the Glenn, I said, can you jitterbug? Yeah. And he said, jitterbug? Oh, yeah! He never jitterbugged. And so I remember he went over to the orchestra leader, who was Owen Bradley, and said, would you play a fast number? Fifi and I go jitterbug. No, not Fifi, Carolyn. I was Carolyn then. And so he started playing something, and I kind of burst out in my thing, and he pretended to do something, and then the whole entire dance floor stopped dancing and formed a huge circle around us and watched. And I felt kind of silly because I could tell he couldn't do it. He didn't know how to do it. And so anyway, the next day, the next school day, the boys started calling me Fifi the Dancer. And from then on, I became Fifi the Dancer. But at Hillsboro, I was Carolyn.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
The story.
And so, and then there was one other thing. After Jimmy and I married, we were at New York Hospital, Cornell. And he said, when we go up there, I will introduce you as Carolyn. I said, oh, that's fine. And so he got up there and he said, this is my wife. Her name is well, we call her Fifi. And so
it's pretty much stuck from that point on.
My mother even ended up calling me Fifi because I said, Mother, why are you calling me Fifi? And she said, well, nobody else knows who I'm talking about.
That's great.
So that was that story.
So let's get into you meeting Jimmy.
Oh,
and
okay.
I'll just let you have the floor, however you want to talk about meeting Jimmy for the first time, what your initial impressions of him were, and how you eventually got to start dating and everything from there.
Well, it's kind of strange. When I was a freshman at the Alpha Chi, he was an Alpha Chi, and I went to the dance with an Alpha Chi. It may have been Paul Storm.
Really?
Now that I think of it, I think he was. I don't know, I can't remember. I went to a sub dance with him. Anyway, Glenn was there, and I remember we went to, after the dances, there would always be followed by a breakfast, and you went to somebody's house, and the mothers prepared a breakfast. Nobody drank, nobody smoked, nobody did drugs in my generation.
Yeah.
It just wasn't a problem. There were a few people that did smoke a little bit on the side, but there was very few, and they were looked down upon. I'm lost.
So we were talking about the first time you met Jimmy.
Oh, okay.
And
So Jimmy was having the breakfast, the Alpha Chi breakfast at his house. And he had this wonderful playroom down in the basement. We used to go over there all the time after dates and dance and sit around, just a group of us, you know. And we'd turn on the record player. There were LPs. And we would dance. And we were going down the stairs. We'd been eating brunch upstairs. We went down the stairs to the basement. It was a really cute basement, big, and it was all fixed up real cute. And Glenn said, I want to dance. I want to jitterbug with Fifi. And I remember Jimmy stopped on the thing and he said, "Who is Fifi?" And Glenn introduced us. "This is Fifi." So he met me as Fifi. And that was a freshman year in high school. Well, Jimmy started calling me and asked me out for dates. I did not like him at all. I thought he was childish, immature, skinny, and every time we go out for a date, I would just do ridiculous things like hide where he couldn't find me. Oh, I'm embarrassed to even tell these horrible things I did.
So, like, how would you hide? How does that work?
Huh?
Like, where would you hide?
Just in an alcove or a store.
Yeah.
Something like that. And he had to come find me. He was buying the tickets.
Yeah.
It must have cost 25 cents.
So would you go to the movies? Is that what you're talking about?
When you had a date, you always went to the movies.
Gotcha.
And the movies were much better than they are nowadays. They weren't violent. Mm-hmm. And they were, a lot of them were musicals. And then the dramatic ones, we usually had a romantic part to it. And
yeah. So when you say that Jimmy was a little immature, so like what kind of things made you think that?
Well, for instance, he took me out one night to the Alpha Chi hayride, and I knew he wanted to put his arm around me, but I knew he didn't have the courage. And so he just eventually went like this, and I was about to try. I was about to laugh. This is a movie on the hayride, and then his hand dropped. That was the first sign of it.
That's so funny.
I know it. And he wasn't, you know, he was just a freshman. He wasn't filled out, and he hadn't blossomed yet.
Yeah. So when did that change, at least in your mind?
Well, he dated a girl named Polly Ann Trevino. And when he was a sophomore, he finally caught on to that. I was being so ugly. He quit dating me. And otherwise, and so he dated Polly Ann, and she was a good friend of mine, and she would tell me about her dates, and I thought, this sounds like it's kind of growing up. And we went on I remember we went on a house party up in Mount Eagle, and we drove back. A boy I was with was named Ben Adams, and Polly Ann and Jenny were in the front seat and we were in the back. And this sounds so ugly, but I thought, I just know I'm gonna marry him someday.
Really?
That thought wasn't in my mind.
Huh.
because he had then developed. He was playing football, basketball. He just really changed.
Yeah.
And then when Polly Ann started breaking up with him, he kind of came back to me. And Debbie, my closest friend, Debbie Kate, still my close friend, and she lives in Texas now. And we were dating a lot. You dated a lot then. And well, we were dating. I was dating 3 boys, I guess, at one time. No, 2. And then the other one came along. Then Jimmy came along. And she was dating Billy Coble and Tommy Kate, whom she married. And I was dating Robert McNeely and Jackie Duncan, who's head of Murray, Ohio, Benjamin. They were all passed away now. And we had to invite somebody to the sap dance. Well, here we were dating 2 boys at the same time, both of them thinking they were number 1, and we didn't know what to do. So we decided we would have a tea dance at Belmead Club, and we'd invite the one that we liked the least to that, and another one to the sap dance. Well, and then we could still get to the Delta Sig and the Kappa Phi dance. Well, they called off. Neither of us got invited to the Kappa Phi. And I took Robert and she took Tommy to the sap dance.
That's so funny.
Oh.
So
you hadn't done anything like this.
Not like that. That's pretty elaborate plan. I like it. Okay, so Jimmy's starting to fill out. You have the idea that
yeah.
You're gonna marry him. So.
But he had started calling me. Right. Oh, he called me before the tea dance and asked me to take him.
Wow.
And I said, I can't do that. I'm already taking somebody. And I was interested.
Yeah.
You know. And so then he would call me again, and things got, well, we were getting along better and better. And he was supposed to be breaking up with Polly Ann. But the night of the sap dance, at the end of the dance, they always play Good Night, Sweetheart. That's the last song. And they dimmed the lights. And unfortunately, Robert was saying all these romantic things, and I was going, and Jimmy, and I was watching Jimmy with Polly Ann, and he was holding her kind of close, and I thought, oh, they're going to wear that together. But they didn't. And the first real date we had was right after that, on New Year's, on January the 1st. We thought we were going to have a group over at my house. And we did, and they didn't come. And so we played some records and danced in the living room, putting handkerchiefs over the lamps because my mother wouldn't let us turn the lights out.
That's so funny.
And that was the beginning.
Wow. And so what age were you then?
I was a senior in high school.
Senior in high school.
And I went to the Alpha dance with him. We ended up for dinner on. It was the 2 of us. But I still, mother would not let me date just one person. And Junior wanted to have 2 dates a weekend. And mother said, you can have 1 day with Jimmy, but you got to have somebody else. And I said, well, what if nobody asked me? Well, okay.
Wow.
But I still continued to date a little bit. Well, not a whole lot, because I went away to college. I went to Lindenwood in St. Charles, Missouri. It's out of St. Louis, and it was a girls' school.
How did you find out about that college?
About 6 or 8 of us from Harvard all went there.
Okay.
So there was a group of us.
Gotcha.
And Ms. Who was it? Anyway, they suggested that I could be in Vanderbilt.
Gotcha.
So, that's all they needed to tell me. Because I was in love, and I was going to get to Vanderbilt. So I worked my tail off at Lindenwood. And I had really good grades because I did the Harvard and everything but math. I never have been able to do that. Can't do it yet. And so I went to see the math teacher every single day for help. She felt so sorry for me. She passed me with a C, and I had all A's and B's except in math, and I got in Vanderbilt.
That's awesome.
Dynamite.
So how long were you at Lindenwood for?
Just a year.
1 year, and then you went to Vanderbilt. So what was that like between you and Jimmy while you were in Missouri and he was still in Nashville?
He drove up there in the city.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Oh, and he would call me long distance every Sunday night.
Wow.
And one time his parents came with him. They wanted to see. Well, he would come up and he would really whine and dine and take me out. I'd never had a filet mignon before. And then we went to here. We went to a nightclub in Frankie Lane. I know that didn't mean anything to you, but he was a singer that was popular.
Yeah.
You need to turn on.
We're good. I just wanted to check real quick to make sure.
But at Lindenwood, I used to swim a lot, and I ended up taking what they call synchronized swimming.
Mm-hmm.
And I could really do some pretty things. And we had a show where we swam with lights attached to us. That really made me nervous.
Yeah.
Underwater, and people, it was for the school to see.
Wow.
Yeah. I enjoyed that. I always enjoyed designing houses. Don't ask me why. But when we were at Lindenwood, I'd run around and I'd make pictures of houses and then I'd sketch them. Well, it was, it was just in my blood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clearly.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So just to wrap up, put a bow on the Jimmy story. So when did he eventually propose to you? How did he propose to you? How did all that go?
We were at Montego on a house party. We were in the car with another couple. We were in the front seat. It was pouring down rain. And we were kind of carried on. And that was it at that time. He says, I'd want us to get married as soon as I can get out of town. That was it. Then for another 4 years later, that was too long. Well, I had to finish college. Well, I was in college. Yeah, he did what they call senior in absentia. If you're real smart, you can skip your senior year and go on into medical school.
Wow.
So he graduated early, and he was a first-year medical student when I was a senior at Vanderbilt. And I managed to graduate from Vanderbilt in spite of everybody.
That's incredible. So.
In fact, I didn't even do too bad at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, that's great. So what year did you two get married, and what was the wedding like?
We got married in July the 27th, 1952. That's right.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And where was the wedding?
Jimmy, we were going to, it was at Woodmont Christian Church where Madolyn married. And we've joined that church. And to this day, I still love that church. I've tried to, I keep wishing James and Anna would visit. It's got a lot of young people and wonderful members. It went through a rough time. That's why we had to leave. His father had a coronary and had to have bypass surgery at a time that it wasn't practiced. It was very serious. So we had to put off the wedding a little bit. Well, we did marry on July the 27th when we felt like his father was strong enough.
Gotcha. And so at that point, was Jimmy a Christian at that point? Or?
He was, how do you put it? He was a Christian, but not a strong. He was a believer to a degree, but not a strong believer. Mm-hmm. And that brings me to the story I'm going to tell you. After I would go to Sunday school, I would go to church. Jimmy would go to the hospital. Well, he was on call all the time, and he had any excuse. But I kept thinking he never said anything about not believing. It's just as I could tell, he never was real strong about it. And so after we were married, and Jim was 3 years old, and we were at Ward-Belmont Hospital, and I just had Bobby. We was Bobby then. Bob, and he got, I'm not going to go into too many details, but the Army sent him to Vietnam. We had a 3-year-old and a 3-week-old baby when they said that. We were at Ward-Belmont Hospital, which is the cream of the crop for being in the Army. And while we were there, before that happened, the Cuban crisis came on. And John F. Kennedy I can't remember. He was going to be sent to Cuba and to a field hospital, and he came home and made a will. I don't think I had Bob yet. I think I was pregnant with Bob, and that was very upsetting. And I had to sign all these papers. And I was young. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know where I was going to go. We had rented a house, and he was told that he had to get up and go be at the Air Force Base at a certain time. They'd be flying him to Cuba. And then they called and they said, you can go ahead and sleep, and we'll call you when it's time. So we went to bed and they hadn't called us all night. And then the next morning, got another call. And I don't know how much you know about the Cuban crisis, but I can't remember much about it myself. But Russia or somebody anyway, they threatened them and they backed down. And we and Jimmy didn't have to go. So, but it was not long after that. He did have to go to Vietnam because they were making an example of doctors who wouldn't sign up for another year. He got to come home. He came back to Nashville before he was shipped out. He had a few days off, and we kept trying to see if he was trying to see if he could get to Thailand and take me and the children with him. And but that never worked out. And I'm not going to go into too much detail because it's just to take too long. But when he was in Vietnam, he was caught in the coup, the overthrow, where they overthrew Notre Dame, and he was in denying on a rooftop with things going over the top of him. And he was writing me. We wrote every day. And when we didn't write, we made tapes. And once a month, I made a movie. So you see Bob, first year, he never saw him. And Jim, I'd have Jim on it too, of course all of us loved him, and we would do that. But, and telephoning, you couldn't, and it was a whole year. It was really rough. I really thought I'd never see him again when he left, because the war was breaking out, and I didn't know. I just didn't understand. I didn't even know where Vietnam was. I'd never heard of it at that time. But I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this. The main thing I want to tell on this tape is something that I think is beautiful in a way, and that is how Jimmy became a real Christian. And while he was in Vietnam, and he would go out to what they called hamlets, and he would take care of the people right there. There was no doctors or anybody to take care of anybody. I noticed he always, I get pictures of him, always had a pistol in his belt or something, whatever they wear. And we sent pictures back and forth to each other. And after the overthrow of Notre Dame, he got back to Da Nang, where he was stationed. And he had a few days off. And he ended up with some missionaries. And these missionaries were Americans. They were over there. And they talked to him and changed his life. And he wrote me back and he said, well, to tell me about it, it was getting close to the time for him to come home. And he said that And at the same time, I was doing an about face. I thought God wasn't going to bring him home to me. And I was bitter, and I wasn't sure what I believed in. I was reading Catherine Marshall's Beyond Ourselves, which was helping me a little bit. But here Jimmy comes and finds Jesus and God, and I'm pulling away. It's just strange. But anyway, when he got home, we stayed in San Francisco for about a week, I guess, after he came home. And after that, we only had 2 weeks before we had to report back to WWII and finish up his term. But from then on, he has become a strong Christian. And it's important to him that all of our children and grandchildren, the family, be that way. And he even went so far as to be a deacon in the church. He was asked to be on the sessions. Anyway, Jimmy, we went back to Walter Reed. Surprise! I'm pregnant again. And then this Madolyn says, Mom, will any of us a surprise? And I had to say, yes, darling, you are. But you are our love child.
Oh, man.
And then Jim and Bob both put their heads on the table when she was saying this. But they couldn't believe she was saying it.
Oh, man.
Oh. Okay, so then after Vietnam, we went to, after we got out of Walter Reed, then we had to move to Michigan, to the University of Michigan. And that was not a real good experience. We had Madolyn in Michigan, and we didn't have any money any time, and we lived in this little cracker box. We called them cookie cutters. They were all like, down the street. We were renting it, and 2 doors down was, and Bob and Jim wandered down to the house and was playing. Well, we didn't want them wandering off. They're 2 years old, and so Jim went and got them, and they said, huh, you never don't want to segregate? You want to segregate? And they weren't very nice to us. And that's the kind of neighborhood we lived in at that time. So, and then I met a couple that were doctors who'd never been to the South and thought we were all hillbillies. and really put us down. Something awful. The Selma March had taken place with Martin Luther King. And during that time we kept going to church. Nobody ever came and called on us or did anything. We were really ostracized in that way. The only thing that was really funny is when Jimmy introduced me to the people in his department, it was endocrinology. And one woman said to me, and what country are you from?
Oh my gosh.
And I said, well, I'm from the South.
Yeah.
We just talk different.
Oh man.
It's funny the things you remember.
So how long were you in Michigan for?
2 long years. It snowed constantly. Just constantly snowed.
And then so from there you were able to move back to Nashville?
Mm-hmm. That's when Jimmy went and practiced and came back and he interviewed with a number of doctors. He was invited into about 3 practices, which was, and he chose Howard Foreman. And he practiced with Howard until Howard died. And then, after that, Howard had sold his practice. He knew he was dying. He sold his practice to someone, and it did not turn out that Jimmy and this person were compatible. And so Jimmy kind of went off on his own for a little bit. He had a pretty good practice anyway. And Paul Stone, Jimmy and Paul have been friends probably since kindergarten. They went to church together when they were little boys. And they've just known each other. They went to medical school, Paul behind Jimmy. And Paul, and then we had Paul and young Paul and Jim were rooming together at Arbor. And so Big Paul, I guess you'd say, well, the other Paul, your Paul, is bigger. And I lost my train of thought.
Yeah. So moving back to Nashville, Jimmy, with his new practice, you said he's kind of doing his own.
And then I lost my daddy very suddenly. And that was, I'd moved back to Nashville, and I'd been gone so long I had to make friends again. And some of my close friends had moved away. So it was a little bit hard. And I had studied interior design through a correspondence course at the New York School of Interior Design. Really just for my own good. And I had also taken a course from UT. And just thinking it's interesting, fun, and help me laugh. And so then it started that people were asking me to help them. And I was just helping them for free. And Jimmy said, Fifi, you need to just go into business. And so I studied the business course too. And so the next person I had, one friend I told her that I was doing it for free. I told her I was going to have to charge, that I was going in business. I don't think I did her house.
That's funny. So going back to your parents, so you said you lost your dad. I'd just be curious to hear you talk about your parents, how they brought you up. You know, were they strict? Were they more loose? How did they bring you up? What was your relationship like with them?
I feel like I was close to my mother and my daddy. Daddy. And Daddy would take me with him when I was little down to the store and let me just play around and while he did some work. And That was in Huntsville, and I can still remember that.
Yeah.
I can still remember Daddy taking me on Halloween out to the spooks, and that scared me, and I didn't like it, and I've never liked Halloween.
Really?
To this day, I don't like Halloween. We didn't have trick and treats that day.
Yeah. So what were your parents like? Like, what were their personalities like, Dad and your mom?
Daddy had to travel a lot, and that was unfortunate, I think, because he was in charge of all these stores. And so I didn't feel like they had a lot of couple friends in Nashville. Mother had a world of friends. But Daddy did not. He had a very close friend, Moulton Farrell, was his closest friend. And they had football tickets together. They would, go with those games. Daddy drank and smoked, and he did not want me to know he was drinking, and he hid it, and would go in the bathroom. But I found out that was the case, and I think he may have gotten a little out of hand sometimes. Mother wasn't much of a drinker. She might have a glass of wine, but that was really later. She just never did. And they raised us to be Christians, and we visited our grandparents a lot, who lived in Florence. We were in Huntsville, it was only 60 miles. It took an hour and a half then. But halfway through, I got an Eskimo pie.
That's great. And so, sorry, go ahead.
My mother and Daddy were somewhat strict in a lot of ways. When I was in high school and would wear shorts, my daddy would make me come upstairs and change my clothes. I wasn't to wear shorts for them boys.
Yeah.
Mother, if I had dates, if I was past curfew, the lights on the outside went blinking on and off for me to come in.
Did you ever get into any trouble as a child?
I'm sure I did. I do remember one incident where the school closed and we had to walk home, and I had lunch money for lunch, and I took my lunch money and went and bought candy. And when Mother asked me where the lunch money was, I made up some story, and I got a switching. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. And how did you and Jimmy go about raising your kids? Did you take things that you learned from your parents and apply them? Did you feel that you were more strict than Jimmy, or Jimmy more strict than you, or?
I might have been more strict.
Yeah.
Although Jimmy was too, we were shocked at what the world was turning into, and we couldn't believe we didn't want our children drinking or smoking or any of those things. And Jim was a handful.
Would you say he was the most out of the kids, or
yes.
Madolyn? Yeah.
Yes. And Then there was Madolyn, and Bob was more, I thought Bob was more straight guy. I think he made up for that. And I thought he was straight enough that when Madolyn and Bob got in school and they go to these parties, they'd both go to the same party. I said, Bob, be sure and take care of Madolyn and watch out for her. And I guess he did, I don't know.
Yeah.
But we